really complicated painting. Probably, ultimately, I think it's more complicated than it really needs to be, but I was doing a lot of experimenting with this particular piece because I've been working pretty intensely. I've always been really fascinated with the juxtaposition of the organic to the geometric. In the last several years, I've been developing the technique, my own technique as related to the organic qualities of the paint and what emanates from the relationship of color and shape and form, especially as it comes through texture. I had been doing a tremendous amount of experimentation with technique in order to develop the textural quality of the painting, because there's something about the whole sense of texture in the painting that I've always been fascinated with, the idea of decay or the romance that I think we associate oftentimes with decay. You know, old buildings that were and no longer are, but somehow there's an idea in our head about what that represented, and there's a sense of nostalgia about it. So the texture has always given me this window into the idea of aging a surface or agitating a surface in such a way as time does on walls, on floors, on all kinds of surfaces, and we see the way surfaces become weathered through time. What happened in this painting, and what I was working on specifically with this painting, was to introduce geometry, and how am I going to bring the juxtaposition of the geometric in, moving it in contrast or contrary to what's going on with the organic part of it. And so you can see what's happened with the introduction of the geometrics as they're cutting through the organic portion of the paint. And so I'm using it in several ways. I'm using it to juxtapose planes, to play with the depth of space, so that suddenly the eye is needing to find a place for these organic forms. Are they in front of, are they behind, are they intertwined within? And so I'm starting to play with that in this painting, and it's really an exciting painting, and it's a lot to take in, because there's so many things going on texturally, and it almost becomes over texture. But at the same time, because at this point now in my work, I've introduced and realized that part of what I'm really after here is the introduction of more negative space, which you start to see happening in certain parts of the painting here. And as my work evolves, that sense of negative or void starts to play a more prominent role in the dance of the different elements. So what happens here is you see the plane sort of cutting up the geometry, and then you see color being used to push and pull the forms forward and backward. But now what's happened is I've simplified the field a lot in my work. This one, I didn't. I was really kind of letting loose and just really going for texture, going for layering, and in a sense, wanting to see how complex that layering can become. So here, I find myself experimenting with the opacity, the very viscosity of the paint. In other words, what happens when the paint is applied in somewhat of a, with a very dense viscosity to it, and other times when I thin the paint way down and almost to a water-like viscosity, and that's allowing for further layering. So even within a given area, when you see a certain kind of opacity of the paint, and then a portion of it is removed, but then it's gone back over with, might be termed as a wash that comes back over. And so you see throughout this whole piece a lot of layering, and you really see it over here. So you can see the field behind it, and you can see, I don't know, at least 12 to 15 layers of paint that are layered on top in order to increase the texture, increase the depth. One of the tools that I make a lot of use of in this type of composition, well, I use it all the time actually, but I use it both to dry and to move paint around, and that's a hairdryer. So I can use the hairdryer to actually push and move paint, and I use it to dry. So if I'm working on a particular area of the painting and I want to move on, and I want to pick up the canvas or move the canvas, need to move the canvas, in some cases to move the paint or create the shape or form, and the paint is wet, I basically obliterate or destroy what I'm attempting to do and ruin the form. So the hairdryer allows me to get that paint dry enough that it stays static so that I can then come in and put other layers of paint on and over it. And then, and it's actually one of the reasons that I'm working in acrylic, because I evolved out of oil. I actually started working in watercolor and did most of my academic work in watercolor. And you can kind of see a lot of that. I used a lot of watercolor and ink and studied a lot of the Eastern approach, a lot about the Eastern approach to painting with ink. And when I moved into oil painting, because I liked the depth of what was happening with the paint when I was using oil, and I was getting a kind of, a sense of feel that was really working well for me with the oil. What I didn't like about it was the toxicity of it. I didn't like living with oil as well as I do acrylic. It's a much more spontaneous media for me. I can get several moves to dry within an hour or two. And even when I have a lot of paint on the canvas, I can usually, using a hairdryer, I can get enough of a thin film of dry paint that it allows me to move into other sections and even paint over that. But the resolution for that for me in working in the studio is to work on 2 or 3 things at the same time. So I work horizontally, obviously, so that the paint's running in whatever direction I choose. So, or oftentimes the paint chooses. But I work horizontally on large tables that are about 4 by 6 tables that are metal tables on wheels that I can wheel around, put them together if I like, if I have a very large canvas. But oftentimes, normally the way I work is to keep a painting going on each one, so that if I'm at a place where I'm looking for passages to dry, I can then just move over to the other canvas and work on the other canvas. Come back, and what I'll usually find on the canvas that I had been working on is that it's in a place where enough setting has started to take place with the drying process that I can then come in with the hairdryer and really finish it off and then go back into it. Hairdryer also allows me to move the paint, which is not so evident in this particular canvas, but where I want to sort of move the paint into a really soft tonality or blend the colors together, the hairdryer will allow me to do that in the way the air will move one color into the next, and I sort of am able to produce a gradient of color from within the 2 colors. I took this painting to talk about this process specifically because it is so complicated and it's showing so much about it. I don't even know that on camera you're able to see the intricacies of this painting, because what happens as a result is that there's so much movement and so much texture and so much energy going on in the painting that it's very vibrant. It's a very exciting painting. I mean, just to be in the presence of the painting gives there's a kind of just automatic explosion that you feel with the work.